Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This video is in continuation of the React Easy Way Learning part, and we are going to cover the nested components in this part 4th of the series. So one of the important things within React is that we can have nested components. Typically a web application, when we develop, it's not containing one component. It would have many components based upon how you visualize and structure your web application. So we can definitely nest our components within other components, or we can create some independent components without nesting also. So that all depends upon how you want to structure your app. By default, we have one component named as the app component. Normally it is found within the app.js file. And that's the by default component that you would see within your React app whenever you create that scaffolding. So because that's only the first component we have been working with and we have seen that, but in reality we might have multiple components to work with. They can be based upon different use cases or other aspects of the application. So the app component can technically have multiple components nested within that. The app component can also be used to create a footer kind of a stuff or create a header kind of a stuff, which can be a separate component. But if you see the screenshot which I have just created for you, so here is the app component, which is normally represented within the app.js. And here we are nesting one more component called as my address component. So my address component normally would be represented by a myaddress.js file. We'll see how we can create that and nest it. And then this component does only represent, let's say, some kind of details for my address or anything. So we can have one component, or you can have multiple components within the same. And even the my address component can nest certain other components which are going to be used. So it all depends upon how you want to structure your application and your web pages. So based upon that structure, you can create your own components and then actually display them within the app.js. There is also one more thing where we treat the data that can be passed, and that's called as props. Now props is one of the ways by which you can pass on the data from the parent component to the child component. So in this case, the app component is technically a parent component, and my address component is actually a child component of the app component. And in case we want to pass some data from app component to the my address component, we can pass that data with the help of props. I'll actually show you within the practically like how exactly that can be passed. So stay tuned and watch the complete video to exactly see how you can create a new component, nest within the app component, and how you can pass the data from the parent component to the child component. So the first thing what we need to do is we need to create another component before we can actually nest that component within the app component. So let's say within the source of the folder within our scaffolding for the React app, so we can click right mouse button and add a new file. So I'm going to name that file as myaddress.js, and that's my new component which I'm going to create. So I'm just going to call it as function and then my address, and then I can also use props. Now props, as I told you, is one of the way by which you can pass on the data from the main component to the child component. So firstly, we'll try to create that my address component without using props, though we are passing on props, but we'll not be using props, and then I'll depict how you can exactly pass on the data from the parent component to the child component. Now within this function, so we are going to use a return, and we are going to have a dev element, and then we'll say h1, and I'll say my address is okay, and then let's say we'll just use a span, and then we'll just say it's 100 test street That's one thing. And then I just want to use another one, which is a break tag. That's a line break, and I want to use the city name. So let's say right now I'm in Vancouver, and then this is, for example, Vancouver, BC. And then I just want to use a break tag, and then finally I can use a span, and I can say my, let's say, the pin code out here. So we'll just give some random pin code, which is something like that. Okay, so now this is a small kind of a what we call a component that we have created, and this just displays some address. That's all. We just coded it out here. It's my address, and then because we are not exporting it, so I need to export default, and I would say my address, so that I can import it and use it in other components. Okay, so this part of the my component is created. Now we are going to use this my address component within the app.js. Now once I start using within the app.js, so let's say after this table tag, I'm just working with the same application. If you have seen those videos, I've not changed that, so we're just continuing with the same. So I just want to use, before using it, I just need to import the, just like this, import address. So we'll be just importing, let's say, import my address from, and then you just specify the file, which is my address. Okay, makes sense. And then because I have not used it, so I'm just gonna use this and nest it over here. So I'm just gonna say my address. So that's the component which I can render out here, my address. This is a child component. So I'll say child component rendering over here. So that's where the my address is. So if I now just go back and check it out within this, so I can see my address is, and then it just displays my address. Okay, that's a very simple one. So now this particular component, if you see within inspect also, so you go on to the particular this component. So if you see after the table tag, this whole component exactly is another component which has been nested. It's not a part of the main component, rather a my address component that has been nested, but it just renders everything that was there within this particular component. Okay, now what we can do is, because let's say this address component you created and your address changed, so rather than hard coding the address, because you are hard coding within the my address component, you're writing address and everything over here. So if the address changes, we have to come back to this component, make those changes over here. So what we can do is we can even pass on the address as a dynamic concept, like passing it as a props. So what we can do over here is we can just create, let's say, an address out here. So what we can do is let my address is equal to, so we'll say, okay, so the first is street, so that's what it is, and we'll say 100 test street, and then the second is, let's say, city, Vancouver, BC, and then let's say I'm just creating one pin code. So now pin code, I can just specify something like this, whatever I want. So that's my variable, an object which I've created. Now because I need to pass on this, so what I can do over here is I can create a prop or a property. So let's say I can say address is a property, and I'll just pass on my address. Now my address over here is exactly the object that contains everything about that, and address is one property which we are creating for my address component. You can have other properties also. You can create number of properties for this my address component, and then you can access it within the my address component. So how we are going to address this props over here within the my address is, so what we can do over here is we can say props, and then we can say my address address is the name of the property that's being passed from the parent component, and then you just simply say street, right? Because street was the name of the object's property that you want to access. So props dot address is the name of the property being passed from the parent component, and then through the property, because property is receiving a full-fledged object, then I can receive one of its key or whatever is defined within that. So similarly, I can also use props dot address and dot city. So once this is done, so you have city, and then lastly props dot address dot pin code, right? So if you see, so you have 3 pin code, city and street. So street, city and pin code, right? Now if you go back and check it out, so it's not showing the pin code. So 202 street address, everything looks fine. So we might have done some kind of a issue with our naming. That is the pin code, my address, pin code is there. We'll just use a pin code. Okay, so let's see what is the issue. Props dot address dot pin code, that looks fine. Street looks fine, city looks fine, pin code doesn't look fine. Pin code is okay. So let's save it. Let's check back. Now the pin code is still not displayed. Why it is not displaying? Let's check it out. Okay, so let's try some another. Just want to make sure I'm not doing anything. So let's say code, and if I say code, oops. Okay, let's try some another property. So let's say country, and we'll say Canada, and we'll say country is the name of the property. So we'll go back, check it out. Yes, so Canada is displayed. Let's check it out. Let's create another property and see why that was not working. So we'll just use another one. For example, let's try out the code, and we'll just simply say something like this, and then within the address one, we'll just go over here, copy that, paste it over here, just add a line break, props dot code. Okay, oops, it doesn't work that way. Also the code doesn't work. My address, so address is equal to my address, which looks fine. Am I using some property name which is already oops, oh, there is already, I defined the my address out here, so that's why it is giving me an issue. So I'll just change it, my address, to 1. And now if I go back and check it out, because my address is not defined, okay, so address, my address, let me just, my address, okay, let me change that to, because I'm just using the same names. So my name, Rohit address, okay, so copy that and we'll just use it over here, Rohit address. Let's go back, and then you can see it's only working over here, right? So that's how we can pass on the data. And if you want to change the data, you can just go on and let's say over here, change that to, for example, Rohit address to, let's say, another street, go back. Yes, it's automatically changed. So it's always advisable to get the data into some kind of a object or pass that dynamically with the help of props. You can create multiple properties and pass on the data, and then finally you can receive it within the another component through the props. So I hope guys this is going to help you out, and you can try out different components within the app, and then you can create it, and then you can use them, and then you can also pass on the data with the help of props. Thank you guys for seeing this video. Please do subscribe to my channel if you have not already done that. I'll be coming back with the next video within the React app series. Stay tuned and stay safe and stay blessed. Thank you.